Welcome to WRM. I'm your host, the Edward Jones, President and CEO of ProDestiny Coaching. Now, normally I have a guest with me, and I normally say this person is here today to share their thoughts and experiences that will be beneficial to you. Well, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now, this is a solo podcast because I am broadening the scope of my practice. After 5 years of permanently focusing on work relationships, I am having to broaden my practice to include coaching people in committed relationships. So if you're on Tinder or you're watching The Bachelorette or The Bachelor, I'm not the guy for you. I'm looking for people in committed relationships because I'm looking at helping people to develop greater work-life balance. I look at a lot of ways that people look at that because I'm interested in helping people become their entire relationships. Now, work relationships and personal relationships obviously are very different. But by looking at both of them, I think about how work relationships, if you have a bad relationship at work, it carries over to the home and vice versa. If things aren't going so well at the home, it could carry over back to the workplace. My motto is relationships work for those who work on them. So what I want to do is to help people to work on their relationships. When I look at this, I think about whether at the workplace or at home, work relationships do matter. And therefore, I work with natural leaders who want to be more productive at work and more engaged at home. There are a lot of people who are good at one or the other. Now, to be productive at work, it takes one skill set with relationships. Now, I have developed what I call the two sets of relationships, and this is something you can challenge me on. And if you do, I'd love to hear your comments. But I say, with work relationships, I put them in this category. Relationships matter. So my first thing that I look at for a work relationship is interpersonal relationships, interpersonal skills. Then I look at, I guess I call it transactional, because the first thing I think about is when you go into a work relationships, or before you even get into the work relationship, many people have interviews. And the interview is primarily interpersonal. People are getting to know each other, trying to figure out if it's going to be a good fit for the organization. The next thing, it becomes transactional because people determine their compensation in terms of the money they make, insurance, healthcare, all those things are transactional. And then you get to work, and that is functional. Now, if you have a good interpersonal relationship, everything else goes better. In many ways, if you work alone, you could probably still get the work done. But in my opinion, things go so much better when you get along with the people that you work with. The one thing about work relationships, you may never know these people or associate with them if it wasn't for work. How many people have you worked with, and after you leave, you never see or talk to them again? You didn't have a falling out, but you just didn't really have anything else in common other than the work. So the idea is that you want to make that work environment as pleasant as possible, and that's how the work relationships work. Now, when you move over to the more, let's say, home relationships, and especially I'm thinking about the long-term relationship with a significant other, I think the first thing that I say, and this is a kind of a hyphenated word that I developed, and I call it that, again, with relationships, what I call it, let me make sure I get it right, socio-emotional. And what I mean by that is that there is an attraction to someone. You're choosing to be with this person. There's something about them that makes you want to be with them. That could be during the infatuation stage. A lot of people, when they're in that first throes of infatuation, they're just so into this person. They don't know what it is that makes them so attracted to that person, but there's an emotional connection there. In many cases, and a lot of times it actually ends up in a physical connection because you have that certain warmth. Now, that relationship, the socio-emotional relationship, obviously is a lot different than the simple interpersonal relationships that one would have in the workplace. At least that's what I'm thinking the way it should be in order to get the work done and keep everything in balance. After the social-emotional in the relationship at home it's functional because there are things that you have to do. People have to pay the bills. They've got to, if they have children, they've got to figure out how they're going to get them to school and back and all the other things. So there are functions that you have to do as a couple. It may not sound sexy, but it's necessary. And then some couples, when things start to go downhill, and maybe it doesn't have to go downhill, but when it becomes transactional, you do this for me and then I do this for you, and it's transactional, that it sometimes falls into that. So those are things that you want to be aware of. And the most important thing is to be on the front end of these relationships, to know what the stages that they go through, but then be able to figure out the best ways to make sure that relationships stay positive. So that's what I look at with work relationships. And again, I'm so used to saying work relationships, but really relationships. Relationships work for those who work on them. Now, I talked about being proactive, and the thing that I really like to do when I think about this, I guess they talk about in your value proposition, what you provide to people. And this is what I would say for mine is that I work with natural leaders who want to succeed at work and at home. I help them identify the necessary skills to become more productive at work and more engaged at home. So that's the thing that I want to work with people on as they continue to, I guess, grow and prosper in work and at home. Now, the one thing that I look at, because sometimes things get out of hand in a hurry because people aren't paying attention. Now, in my opinion, there are warning signs that can occur to let you know that relationships need attention, whether it's at work or at home. For example, you go to the doctor periodically to get a checkup. Maybe there's nothing wrong, but you always get a checkup to just make sure. Do you wait for the warning light to come on in your car before you take it to the service station? Many times you say, well, what is it? I forget what it is. It's changed so much, but every 3,000 miles or so many months or whatever, you just go in and check it out. But if things are kind of running a little bumpy, then you definitely know you need to check it out. Now, some people ignore the warning signs, ignore the warning lights in the car, ignore the relational warning signs. Now, I have warning signs that I say are for work and warning signs that are for home. Now, some of these, and they're not always mutually exclusive because sometimes there's carryover for both, but I would say the tendency that I have is one for work and one for personal. And the one I have for work is toxic competition. Now, the thing that I look at when I was starting out, I worked in a residence hall, and it was back then you had all male and all female halls, and you had to do activities and programs to engage people to help them build their relationships. Now, the person who had the sister hall, she come up with these very creative ideas. And oh my goodness, I wish I had thought of that. So I would try to come up with something that would be equally beneficial to the population I was working with. And we kind of had a healthy competition with that. But unhealthy or toxic competition is where one tries to tear other people down to build themselves up. It would be equivalent to being in a sports game and actually cheating. For example, if someone is playing golf, and golf is an honor sport, that if you say you did something, then people honor that. But a toxic situation is people would do things that were not actually what took place to gain an advantage. So when you start to see those kind of things, and the main thing I'm thinking about, especially I'm looking at leaders who see this. Because the thing that I always look at, and let me go back, when I started coaching back in 2017, I was thinking about looking at a slice of work called office politics. And when I thought about office politics, I've lived through some as an individual employee and had to manage it or try to overcome it as a manager leader. The thing that I would say about office politics, I started out working with individuals. I know how miserable it can be in office politics if it's just you're the victim of it. I would say I would help people navigate polluted political waters. But I said if you could be the leader, you could purify the water. And that's what leaders do. But as I think about leaders, I think about natural leaders. And when I talk about natural leaders, and this could be a person with a title or without a title, but the definition is someone people would follow with or without a title. They have a way of working with people to make things happen. So natural leaders can also be involved with that when they don't have the power of the position, but they still can help make a difference. But that's who I want to work with, people who are looking at it from that standpoint. Another thing that is really, really can destroy an organization is gossip. And the thing that I had a mentor who would always say that with gossip, if something was happening that he felt you needed to tell the person what the issue was. And if you didn't, what he would say is, I will give you 24 hours to tell the person. If you don't, I will. That stops gossip in its tracks, because everybody likes a good story about it, but you're never really sure if it's really true. And I'm just thinking right now, there was a meme that I saw, and I want to share it with you because I think it really captures everything about that. I hope I can find it quickly so I don't waste a lot of time here. But it talked about, and I'm not running across it real fast here, so let me try this one here and see if it is in this particular bank of memes. And it's not. But basically what it talked about was something to the effect of when people, before you gossip, you have to first of all think about, is it necessary? Is it kind? And I guess I forgot what the third one was, but those are the things that you look at whenever you're thinking about gossip, and gossip can definitely destroy an organization. So you don't want to allow that to happen. And so that's what you want to look at. The next item to think about is isolation. A lot of times there are cliques in organizations, and productive people sometimes are left out of the clique. They do not feel included. So as a manager, you look for people who might be left out. and make sure that they're included in the process. And again, when we go back to those functions, I guess, or I don't know if I call them functions, but that hierarchy of relationships that I talked about with interpersonal, functional, and what was the other one? Interpersonal, functional, and oh man, let's see here. It's right here. Functional and transactional. That you want to make sure that person who's there is there for a reason. Again, it may not to be friends, but they're definitely performing a function. As I said before, with relationships, I think all things go better. So therefore, if you see someone who's isolated, definitely check in to see what's going on with them and find a way to get them to be more engaged in the organization. Now to warning signs on the personal side. One of the biggest warning signs that I think is there is stealth. What about stealth is unspoken expectations. I mentioned about the socio-emotional nature of personal relationships, that people come in with rose-colored glasses and they think the world is as they see it. They were raised a certain way, and there were certain expectations about how things go. The other person doesn't know that, but they are expected to behave in a certain way. And when they don't do that, that causes conflict. So it's always important to make sure expectations are clear. And sometimes you don't even know what to ask about. But that's why it's so important to back up, look and see what's happening, and make sure that the expectations are clear. If they're not, then they need to be discussed. So, for example, would be is that in one family, let's say that the women always did the dishes after a meal, always cooked. And in another family, it was more just everybody did their own thing. That didn't do their own thing, but did all of the responsibilities. It wasn't male, female roles. It was like everybody had to do the work. And one of the things that my parents did was they made sure that boys did traditional female chores, and our sisters did traditional male chores. And they said the reason you need to do that is that when you got married, if your partner was trifling, you'd have to do those things. So they did it as a way of making sure that you were balanced and were able to do that. Someone who is in a situation where that doesn't occur, the expectation that everybody does everything, well, that might cause a problem, but it was an unspoken expectation. So that's a warning sign. The next thing to look for is whether, and this is when arguments occur, when people weaponize words. They look to find the thing that will hurt the person the most. And they say that. Now, they're saying that to make points and to make sure they win that battle, but could actually lose the war in terms of the relationships. They used to say sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, that's obviously, we found out that's not true. So there are certain things that you really want to be careful of, like when someone tells you a weakness that they might have, and then that other person takes it and uses it to hurt the person in an argument. There's a level of trust that's broken. So weaponized words is probably one of the most damaging things that someone could do. The opposite of that is stonewalling. When a person wants to have a conversation and the person just doesn't talk, you're trying to figure out what's happening. The silent treatment is what it also could be called. And that is a way of trying to manipulate someone, but stonewalling, again, is a chance to win the battle, but eventually to lose the war in terms of the relationships. So again, relationships work for those who work on them. As I look at all these reality shows and all these programs that you can see online about toxic relationships, and most of the programs look at ways that this person is wrong or this person is wrong, and there's piling on. And I thinking, who's getting it right? Because they're always looking for people make gross generalizations about things. So they're, instead of working on relationships, they're working on reinforcing a negative position. So it's almost like, do they intentionally not want relationships to work? Relationships do take work. So long after the infatuation is gone, the work has to continue, and you continue learning and growing. And that really is what I want to help people do. So if you are willing to do the work, I'm willing to work with you. Now I'm looking at work and home relationships. So the thing that I want you to imagine waking up every morning excited about going to work and happy to return home to share what went on during the day. Now, that's a good situation because, as I said earlier, that the negative at work can put someone in a bad mood when they get home. Don't talk to me. I don't even bother. I had a bad day. So if they're excited about going to work and then can't wait to talk when they get home, that's great. Now, again, over time, maybe the excitement isn't there, but you have to find new ways to keep work fresh and to keep the relationships fresh. So when you're greeted at the door, that you have positive things to say about your day. Now, again, I'm not saying that everybody's going to have that Pollyanna-ish situation here, and maybe people do need a time to pause to be by themselves before they interact after they've come home from work. So just know what that is, but the idea of being able to be positive with your work and be positive at home, always look for the things that can actually make relationships better in both places. Now, what I have is I call a transformation program. And the way you can look at that is to identify dysfunctional behaviors or practices. Now, this is where this works at home and at work. Finding dysfunctional patterns, relationship patterns, whatever it might be, identify those things, because sometimes they're underneath and you don't even know what it is that you're dealing with. And I think the other thing is clear expectations, because what's in my mind and what's in your mind might be totally different. So we want to make sure that we pause and listen to what's being said and what's not being said. That old saying in communication, that 7% of the communication is with words. I believe it's 38% with tone and 55% with body language. So when you're talking with someone, you want to make sure that you are listening to the words, cognizant of the tone, and aware of the body language to make sure that things are clear. And sometimes it's those little throwaway comments that really are the key things that people would say, like, I wanted to go over here to this place, but it really doesn't matter. Now, is it true that it really doesn't matter? That's one of those small things that you have to pick up on to make sure that it's clear on what the person is really feeling, what they're really expecting. So that would be a way of looking at that. And then the other part, if you feel that what you're doing and you think it's cool, but you've got to check it out to get feedback. Now, is what I'm doing, is it hitting you the way I intend for it to do. Because sometimes you could be doing something, you think that it's on the right track and it's not. So rather than assume that you're affecting the person in the right way, ask and get the feedback to be sure. And what I look at is that to be an active listener, and when I talk about being an active listener, is someone who pauses, clears their head so they are fully present, focusing on what the person is saying. And everybody knows this, that you don't want to be holding and waiting to respond. You just, mind is completely clear. You're fully present, listening to the person, hearing the feedback, being willing to take that, which is much easier said than done. But being able to get that feedback is so important. I think that the other part of it is that you want to align your goals, whether that's with family, you don't want to say that, aligning goals, but you align where you're headed. Because as I mentioned, a part of, well, business relations, of course, you talk about goals, at least you should have if you don't have a good organization. But as a family, you also have goals about where you want to live, about how you want to raise your children, all those things. The goals have to be aligned so that you know that you're on the right path. You won't be working at cross purposes. And then co-create win-win. Stephen Covey with 7 Habits of Highly Effective People would said win-win or no deal. But sometimes when it's the small stuff that's not that important, because win-win, it takes time to really work through that. But everything doesn't have to be at that level. One thing that they said, if you have a small thing like where you want to go to dinner, and rather than going through the whole process of win-win and trying to figure out all those things that go with it, you can say on a scale of 1 to 10, how is going this place important versus the place I want to go? For me, going to this place may be a 3. For my spouse, it may be a 7. So in that way, you say, well, let's just go with the 7. And that's the one way of dealing with that's still, it's not necessarily win-win, but it's not that big of a deal to go into that one. But with win-win, you have to look at all the things that I talked about before, making sure that the expectations are clear, making sure that you're communicating well, you're listening, all those things. That's a lot of work. But for the smaller things, it may not take that. It could just be the poll, a quick poll to do that one. So that way you don't get, everything doesn't have to be UN negotiation. And then, so at this point, and then this is what I always say to the people I work with, is that the half hour goes by so fast. Just to let you know, the offerings that I have, I coach, I do public speaking, I'm a Toastmaster, I blog, and obviously podcast. So, folks, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. To learn more about my coaching practice, go to www.prodestinycoaching.com. Take the work relationship quiz, and let's have a free consultation. And remember, although that's talking about work, I also want to help you with work-life balance. And remember, folks, work relationships work for those who work on them. I am the Edward Jones, Pro Destiny Coaching. Have a great day. Welcome to WRM, Work Relationships Matter. I'm your host, the Edward Jones, a certified life coach. No matter what type of work you do, work relationships matter. Dr. Davin Brown, Vice President of Student Services at Sacra-mento City College, is my guest today. She is here today to share her thoughts and experiences that will be beneficial to you. Welcome, Davin.
Good morning.
Good morning, and it's so glad to have you here. Folks, this is a very busy woman. I am so glad to finally get her to sit down and talk to her, because she has got a lot to say. So, Davin, I think you're very successful. But before all of that began, tell us your backstory. What people, events influenced you as you were coming up? So we know a little bit more before we know what you do. We want to know who you are.
Well, absolutely. I appreciate that. First, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to chat with you today and share a little bit about myself and, my take and experiences with managing, fostering, and maintaining work relationships. Currently serve as the Vice President of Student Services at Sacra-mento City College. I've been in this position for 3 years. Been in higher ed for about 20 years. The large majority of that time has been.
But hold. I want to know the young Davin.
I was getting there.
Okay, all right, okay.
I was getting there.
Okay.
The vast majority has been spent in the four-year sector. I'm now in the community college sector. But the manner in which I was introduced to higher ed started when I was younger. It started through a mentor relationship as an undergrad when I was pursuing my bachelor's degree at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, with a woman who was served in an administrative position in higher ed at Cal Poly San Luis. And it was that relationship coupled with a series of relationships during my childhood and adolescence with other women of, I'd say, influence or had some sort of impression upon me, whether it was my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Davis, or my sixth grade counselor, Mrs. Jackson, or my 11th grade English teacher, Mrs. Swarthout. There were multiple women who were all educators who kind of poured into me and set a framework for the type of woman and professional that I would become. And that's where my spark for education started. Born and raised in the city of San Francisco. I am a third generation native San Franciscan. I was raised in large part by my maternal grandmother. Both of my parents, my mother and my father, struggled with substance abuse when I was coming up. And so my grandmother came out of retirement literally for work, went back to work to make sure that my sister and I were taken care of. And I would say she was my first example. I often tell people my grandmother didn't tell me how to live. She lived and let me watch her do it. And so it's my belief that a lot of things that I do, how I approach work, how I approach my personal life, how I approach parenting, which is probably the most important role, it is the most important role for me, all was influenced by my grandmother and what she showed me as a woman: work ethic, commitment to children, maintaining the household, operating with a high level of integrity, always having the greatest representation of yourself, protecting how you are perceived, have an unwavering love for Christ, and serving people, making a commitment to serving people. And so, again, born and raised in the city of San Francisco, went to public school the large majority of my life. The last 2 years of high school, my father had passed away. My grandmother had additional income coming in from benefits as a result of his death. She took that money and invested in my education, sent me to private school for the last 2 years of high school. And that is what changed the game for me. It opened my eyes to the possibilities after high school, made me realize that college was an option. And from there, I just took off.
That is an amazing story.
Thank you.
And I can see how that influence has made a difference in your life. This is probably one of the most powerful stories that I've heard about the coming of age of someone.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And that is great. So how did you end up in Sacramento?
Great story. So I share with you a little bit about the most important role in my life, being a mom. I am a mom. I am a mother to a young man who will soon be 19. He is a rising sophomore at the Morehouse College, focused on sports journalism. He is my everything, my pride and joy. And so just before he was born, I was in my first professional position at the University of California, Riverside. I served as a student organizations coordinator in their Office of Student Life and Leadership. And I had been in that position for just about 3 years, and I had had my son. And because I am a native San Franciscan, native to Northern California, Southern California, while it was beneficial for getting my feet wet in higher ed, personally, it wasn't the most ideal. And I really valued being with my family. I valued the relationships that I had growing up with my cousins on both my maternal side and my paternal side, and wanted my son to have the same experience. My sister had a son and two daughters, but she had a son who was just a few months older than mine. And I wanted to make sure that they grew up together. So I then began pursuing employment opportunities in Sacramento and in the Bay Area. Sacramento was where I hit. I took a lateral position from UC Riverside to Sacramento State, was in that position for maybe 16 months. Laterals are not the most ideal when you've been at that level for 3 years. And so I began to look for opportunities that would allow me to grow a little more professionally. And then after that, landed a director of student life and service position with the Associated Students. And so there I was able to raise my son as a single mom, have the support of my sister and my mother and my grandmother at the time, and then have the career that I was enjoying. And so that's how I landed in Sacramento. It wasn't my first choice. Growing up, Sacramento was always Cowtown. Nobody wanted to come to Sacramento. In fact, we came once a year only for the state fair. Sacramento is the state's capital. And so the state fair is held here every year. And so my paternal grandparents would bring the grandkids up to Sacramento every year to the state fair. That's all I knew about Sacramento: cows, agriculture. And so when I moved here, I wasn't that excited, but I knew I needed to get closer to my family. But I'll be honest, it was probably the best decision that I could have made for myself personally. Maybe not so much personally, but certainly professionally. And personally, when it comes to raising my son in a safe environment and being a present parent.
Excellent, excellent. Now, the question that I have to ask is, you just sparked this, in terms of being a excellent professional woman, excellent mother, putting it all together, that's tough.
Yes, it is.
You make it sound just like walking and things like that. So talk to me a little bit about that. I think a lot of our listeners who are in a similar situation to you would like to hear how you manage that.
You know what? If I had a formula, I'd be selling it. To be very honest, I don't have a formula. And for quite a few years, I'd often ask myself, like, how are you doing this? My friends would ask me, how do you do this? But I think just being honest and transparent with you, Ed, Black women just don't have an option. We just have to figure it out, right? And so we come from a rich history of taking care of everything and everyone. And so watching my grandmother do it, it was second nature to me. I knew that if I wanted to progress professionally, I had to make some commitments. Some of those commitments required moving or shifting in positions at one institution or advancing my education. If I want to be a present parent, I had to stay in a career that allowed me to do so. And so for me, I balanced it well because higher ed allows for the flexibility, at least from my experience, allowed the flexibility for me to be a present parent. It's not a very corporate position that requires you to hit certain quarterly goals, that requires you butt in seat 9 to 5. A lot of the hours can be evening and weekend. So you're able to flex your time, or I was able to flex my time in a way that allowed me to not miss field trips, that allowed me to not miss parent teacher conferences, that allowed me to be able to work on projects with my son. And of course, that comes with some sort of, dare I say, I don't want to call it a consequence, but it certainly comes with some sort of compromise. And that was with respect to my earning potential. Getting started in higher ed as a student affairs professional, I wasn't making a lot of money, and that was extremely taxing being a single parent. But the time I got to spend with my son because of the field that I'm in was invaluable. And so I made it work. But I also realized when he got to be around 8 years old, that in order for me to give him the life that I wanted to give him and to advance, I needed one more degree. And so when he was 8, I started a doctorate program, and that busted doors open for me. I finished an EDD program in 3 years, right on track, and immediately went into some part-time teaching opportunities at Drexel, at Concordia University, and at Sac State. And so that allowed me to get my feet wet on the instructional side of the house to figure out if that's what I wanted to do, or if I wanted to stay on the administrative side of the house and be a voice for students that way. But it also still provided the flexibility that was needed to be a present parent for a young man who was now entering middle school, right? And the dynamics of that are insane. And so I just figured it out. I found the sweet spots. I was able to teach and work at the same institution, which was a sweet spot. So I did not have to give up much more additional time at home with my son. I was able to teach online with Concordia University, which was a sweet spot because I was able to do that from home when my son was present, and still be involved in his life, in his development. And so it just really worked for me. And I had a really, really great support network that was helpful in my friends and my family. And so managing those relationships and maintaining those relationships were really important, but also maintaining relationships at work, both with my supervisor and my colleagues, were very important, right? Because if I wasn't able to garner the respect in terms of my work ethic, my productivity, my output, or just interpersonally, I wouldn't have been able to manage it all, not being a parent and a professional.
Excellent. One thing that I think about is your son is an amazing young man. And I know that, it's coming up through your family, your grandmother, and everybody helped do that. And obviously, but you had to put in the time, relationally and educationally. So again, there may not be a secret sauce, but just talk about how you were able to maintain that positive, because a lot of times young men get wayward, especially with in single parent households.
Right.
And but he just seems to be so solid, so grounded, whatever. Was it just him, or what did you do, or was it a combination? But it's just an amazing situation. I think it would be something that people would want to make a movie about, probably.
I appreciate that. Often it fills my heart to hear, to receive those sorts of compliments. But I also find myself in this place where I'm like, tell me that when he's out on his own, doing it on his own. Only then will I know if I did a good job, right? But I think now I'm really starting to see the fruits of my labor while he's away, making decisions, choosing leadership opportunities that advance his skill set, his knowledge of his school, knowledge of the world, knowledge of our people. It's just beautiful to see. Now, with respect to a formula, again, if I had a formula, I would be selling that. Because I would say, out of all of the accomplishments personally and professionally, my son's success is the one that I'm most proud of. And I remember very early when in fact, when I learned that I was pregnant, making a commitment to doing everything I could for my son. Everything that I could. And I didn't make the best choices all of the time. I often beat myself up in my private thoughts, like, you shouldn't have done this or you shouldn't have done that, especially with young Black men, right? Unfortunately, we're living in a world where they are the young man who my son is becoming, is not the standard. Right? It's not the expectation. And so there are times where I often feel like I could have been a bit more emotionally intelligent when it came to him. I could have listened more, but I moved out of fear. I'll be honest. I was strict in ways. I limited some of his experiences as a young Black man because I operated in fear, and I didn't want anyone to mistreat him or hurt him or take away an opportunity that was rightfully his based on the color of his skin. And so because of that, I made some decisions that weren't the most ideal. But what I did do was I was extremely intentional. And I realized that I only had 17 to 18 years to get this right. And so if that meant me being a single parent, his father not being as present, being intentional about him getting exposed to mentorship programs such as Alpha Academy or My Brother's Keeper through the Obama Foundation, I did that. If that meant sacrificing 2 hours twice a week to make sure he was at those sessions, I did that. And I sat in the parking lot and I did my homework from the parking lot, or I took work calls from the parking lot. If that meant dedicating my Saturdays to basketball and soccer all day, and I'd have to pick and choose those moments that I had for myself to hang out with friends or travel, I made that sacrifice. And I also made sure that as much as he was involved in social justice opportunities, as much as he was involved in sports, he was also involved in church. He had to have a solid understanding and foundation of Christ and the church, and how important it is to operate in faith and honor God in everything it is that you do. And so I just stayed focused and made decisions on what I believed was right for him, based on also what I had seen. I knew what I didn't want to produce, right? And then I'd seen some models. I'm like, yeah, I want my kid to be like that. And so much like I had patterned my behaviors after the mentors that I had referenced at the early part of our conversation, I try my very best to take from the successful, accomplished, respected men in my circle and my network and pour into my son similar expectations, similar characteristics and attributes that I'd hope that would present themselves in him. So I was just very intentional from the very beginning.
Right, very much so. And, folks, we've been talking a lot about, obviously, Davin's first priority.
Yeah.
What I wanted to talk to her about, shifting gears, was her management style. And because when she was at Sac State, she had all these people used to always come around her. She was this magnet for students, had a great staff and that type of thing. So I'm going to shift gears and just talk a little about that whole process, because you obviously nurtured your son, but you also nurtured the people that worked for you. So how did that whole thing go? And what was your management, your leadership style?
I get asked that question. I think, to be honest with you, my leadership style really depends on the audience. Really, it does. I think you have to be nimble and you have to understand. Leadership is understanding what people need. It also involves understanding the role that you play, meaning leading folks does not always mean you're at the forefront. Sometimes I'm in the middle. Sometimes I'm on the side. Sometimes I'm in the back. It's also important to understand in terms of how I view leadership that an effective leader is only effective if they're able to lead folks they're not directly responsible for, right? I can supervise and manage folks all day, but leading people, the test comes when you're able to make shifts and have influences over folks that you don't directly supervise or manage. And so I think that's where I do my best work. As far as the students and staff that I worked with over the course of my career, specifically at Sac State, they were like an extended family to me. I cared deeply for those students. And a lot of that was because they spent so much time in my workspace. And for no reason other than that felt like the living room at the university for them. It was where they could come, hang out with their friends, chit chat, talk about the happenings of the day or current events, gain some insight in a very real and authentic way. And that's very important, especially for Black students attending a predominantly white institution, to have space to be able to truly be themselves, operate in authenticity, because far too often when they leave that space and they are walking the yard of the campuses or the hallways of the buildings on the campuses, they have to shift. They have to shift to who they believe has to be the representation of themselves that is better received by society. And in my workspace, in my office space, that wasn't the case. They could be who they truly were. And I think that's a component of the leadership skill set. I operate in authenticity. I don't believe that I would be as successful as I am if I showed up as someone different every day. If I wasn't truly who Davin is, I wouldn't be able to sit at tables making decisions, prioritizing our most disproportionately impacted students, which are students that look like you and I. And I'm able to do that with a high level of courageousness and integrity and audacity. And so, and again, back to your question, what is my leadership style? Again, it just really shifts. It depends on the situation. It depends on the audience and what's needed in the moment. So if there are times if I'm needed to be in the thick of something, I have no problems rolling up my sleeves and getting into the thick of it. If I need to fall back a little bit and highlight the strengths or opportunities for folks that I'm working with so that they can advance, get some shine, or get it, greater enhance their skill set, I find ways to be able to do that. But I think at the core of it is simply being present. What I have learned in my work is just showing up and saying hi to people goes a long way. It goes a long way. I remember growing up in the field and seeing vice presidents of student affairs and having no desire to ascend to that level. And the reason for that is because it appeared to have such a great disconnection from the students and this system of hierarchy that wasn't attractive to me, because I knew that the folks at the ground level, myself and my colleagues at the time who were doing great work and touching the students most directly, our insights and our perspectives weren't being taken into consideration. And I didn't want to be a leader like that. So I made a commitment once I ascended to this level to have a presence, to be a walking manager, to show up and say hi, to not introduce myself as the vice president, to walk in to an office and say, hey, right? And not to have folks stand and say, greetings, vice president. I want people to be comfortable, because I firmly believe where you are comfortable, you are most productive. And we want to make sure that we get the best out of folks. And so I think operating in authenticity has helped me to do that.
Now, as the vice president, because I knew you when, but in terms of your current role, what's life like for you? Because now you're supervising, obviously, full-time professionals and all of that. So basically, is it the same thing, or how is that dynamic change from the time you were supervising people at Sac-State to the full-time and, leaders who are leading people who are managers over other people? So how has that dynamic, how is that working?
It is definitely different.
Okay.
It is definitely different. I still truly value interactions with students, and I miss it a great deal, but I find ways to tap into it. What I try to remind myself is when I get into those spaces where I'm like, my coordinator days and my director days when I was so close to students, I miss those days. But I try to remind myself that there's a reason why I'm here. You have a seat at the table so that you can make decisions that benefit those students that you're not able to directly work with in ways that you used to, right? And so that is an opportunity that I do not take lightly. And so while the work feels the same, there's a higher sense of responsibility and appreciation that I have for the opportunity to sit at the table and push hard for students that I know need it the most, and oftentimes don't have a voice. right? Because a lot of times we get caught up in language that we believe is inclusive, but it's very exclusive, like disproportionately impacted or students of color, when the reality is we need to call out these specific populations, because then and only then will we address the individual needs of these specific student populations. We can't demonstrate care or fake care and say Black men are disappearing from the halls of higher education, or our Black students are having our lowest performing, or our Latinx students are not doing as well in their transfer level math and English classes as their white counterparts. We can't say that and then not intentionally find ways to serve them, not to disrupt structural inequities that exist within the processes and the policies that we maintain at the institution. And so in my current role, I'm unwavering about that. I call it out for exactly what it is. And so while I don't get the opportunities every single day to see those students and work with those students and know their needs, I definitely represent them at every single table I sit in.
Great, great. Now let me ask you this, because the thing that happens when you move up and you take a position, there's a leadership team that's already in place. And sometimes that leadership reflects who you are, sometimes it doesn't. And so the thing that happens is sometimes people say you want to kind of, and I don't want to sound sacrilegious, but you create an organization in your image, so they reflect who you are when you're not there. So in your case, did you hire all your leadership team, or did you inherit them, and how did that whole adjustment process work?
Right. So I said currently it's about half and half now. When I got here, I had a team. I've had the luxury of hiring an associate vice president who is outstanding. I've had the luxury of hiring 2 permanent deans. One of them was an interim when I came on board, but was new to that interim role. And then 2 other deans were already in their positions, and so they're still on board. And then some supervisors who are in management positions. I've had the opportunity to hire a number of those. When it comes to hiring, I think it's very important that you understand, or that administrators understand, hiring folks that are like you are going to produce the same outcome. If you're looking for something different, you have to be courageous enough to hire folks with different lenses, different approaches to the work. You have to be honest about where your gaps are and identify folks who may have strengths in areas that you need some development. For example, hired the associate vice president of student services last October. I am a firecracker. I'll walk in a room with a whole lot of energy, with a whole lot of expectation. Let's move, make decisions in a moment. He is far more of a processor. I knew I needed someone like that would help balance me out, right? Because if I was constantly hiring firecrackers, right? Then the college would feel like it was on fire. They're constantly responding to this energy, and not everyone has that same temperament, that same personality. They don't approach work in the same way. And I also wouldn't be stretching myself as a professional, right? I believe that mentorship and relationships have to be mutually beneficial. And so in ways that I learn from the folks that I mentor, or the ways they learn from me, I learn from them also. And the same can be said for the folks that I work with. There are some deans that I work with that I did not hire, but I learned some skills from them that will be beneficial for me as I continue to do this work. So I firmly believe that we need to get away from hiring ourselves when we're looking to fill positions. That's the only way that we can best serve the community we're trying to best support.
Well stated. Now, is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you said, oh, I really would like his listeners to know this, or just advice that you think people could benefit from your vast experiences, education, everything considered? what would you do? What would be your parting words that you give to this audience, just to let them know what Davin has learned and wants to give to others?
Oh my goodness, I don't even know where to start to pick. A few things come to mind. The first thing that comes to mind is life is about how you frame it, right? Whether you're in the field of education, you're in business, you're in technology, no matter what, you will be presented with situations that you can view as either obstacles or opportunities. And the manner in which you approach those situations, the outcome is going to be framed in either an obstacle or an opportunity. I myself like to look at even the most challenging situations as opportunities to showcase how exceptional I am. Because I firmly believe when we approach it with that sort of optimism and positivity, the outcome will be as such. If we view all things as obstacles, it will be that much more challenging for us to move through the situation, right? And we have to be in control of our own thoughts. We have to take care of ourselves mentally. And so if we're always stressed out and viewing things as a challenge or through the lens of a deficit mindset, we're not making a commitment to ourselves. I also firmly believe that a well can only provide water if water is poured into it. So if you are managing relationships where you're constantly giving and you don't create opportunities where folks are pouring into you, you're going to tap out. Right? And so take care of yourself. Make sure that you are identifying ways and opportunities to get some water poured into your well, because only then can you pour into other folks. And then lastly, move in authenticity. It gives you so much peace. You don't question the decisions that you make later. You don't question whether you're compromising who you are as a person or what your value or belief system is. Operate in authenticity every single time, as much as you can, and make people accept you for who you are. You don't have to make adjustments to make other people comfortable, especially when it comes to communities of color. Far too often, we have operated in discomfort so that other folks can be comfortable. You have to be confident enough to move away from that. People will accept you for who you are. Show up as your true self every single time. It is a self-care practice that I'm unwilling to give up.
And it's definitely paid off for you. So if people want to, and folks, a half hour doesn't do justice for all this woman has to offer. So Davin, if people want to learn more about your programs, about Sacra City College, or anything, where would they go to get information about you or the college and the programs that you are over?
Well, they can certainly go to my LinkedIn page. It's up to date. I'm not super active on it, but it's definitely up to date with respect to the things that I'm doing professionally. They can simply look me up as Davin Brown through LinkedIn, or Davin E. Brown through LinkedIn. And additional information, I'd encourage you to visit Sacra-mento City College's website. We have a wealth of opportunities, whether folks are looking to obtain an associate's degree, transfer, or certificate program. So many options, so many financial resources available for students, whether you are a traditional age student transitioning from high school into college, whether you are an older student looking to come back to college, whether you're an older student who's never attended college, we have space and opportunity for everyone here at Sacra-mento City College. And I'd be more than willing and it's super excited to have a conversation with anyone who is interested in attending Sacra-mento City College, and make sure that they're connected with some of our rockstar folks to ensure their success.
Excellent, excellent. You heard it here, folks, and you know where to go. Davin, thank you so much.
Very welcome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And once again, I am the Edward Jones, host of this podcast and a certified life coach. To learn more about my coaching, go to www.prodestinycoaching.com, take the work relationship quiz, contact me, and let's have a conversation. And remember, relationships work for those who work on them.